Welcome to my channel. A forward base on the edge of collapse, a squad moments from surrender, and a woman sent only as a logistics observer who turned the battlefield upside down. This isn't a story about medals or glory. It's about the ghost in the shadows who refuses to let good people die forgotten. I came to Forward Base Anvil with a clipboard and a temporary assignment order, nothing more. No rifle, no command, just a job to observe. That's what the papers said. The chopper touched down in a haze of grit and engine heat. I stepped off slowly, carefully, not because I was hesitant, but because my right knee still remembered an injury I'd sustained in an operation no one here had clearance to ask about. I kept my stride even, deliberate. No limp, no wince. Just the trained grace of someone who had learned to ignore pain when it wasn't useful. The others on the landing pad didn't know what to make of me. I was in my early 40s, ordinary on paper, hair pulled tight in regulation bun, boots worn just enough to show use. One duffel over my shoulder. A clipboard clutched like a weapon. I didn't expect a welcome party, and I didn't get one. The air at Anvil tasted of diesel and defeat, thick with sand and fumes from overworked machinery. The desert beyond the fence stretched wide and jagged, peaks like broken glass under a sky the color of ash. From the edge of the pad, two men watched me approach. One of them, Chief Raoul Jennings, wore the fatigue of someone who hadn't slept well in weeks. I recognized the type, combat-seasoned, eyes scanning everything, never fully at ease. Beside him, his second-in-command, Petty Officer Isaac Navarro, spit into the dirt and didn't bother to hide his skepticism. "You've got to be kidding me," Jennings muttered, just loud enough for Navarro to hear. "They send us a logistics observer?" Navarro chuckled. "Yeah, base brass says she's here to monitor how we function in." "What did they call it?" He squinted toward the eastern horizon. "High-conflict terrain." "Right. Like the burn doesn't just chew people up and spit their bones back out." They were talking about the burn, a steep, natural basin about 2 clicks east of the base. On paper, it looked like a geological fluke. In practice, it was a graveyard. 3 teams had gone in over the past 6 months. One came out intact. The rest were buried where they fell or lost entirely, their last GPS signals blinking out like dying stars. I approached with an even pace and kept my voice calm. "Chief Jennings." He turned to me with a wary look. "That's me. You're the observer?" "Assigned to monitor operational logistics in high-risk terrain," I said, matching their tone with clinical precision. He gave a tight nod. "Well, ma'am, with respect, this isn't a place observers last long enough to write reports." I glanced, briefly but intentionally, toward the eastern ridgeline, the one shadowing the burn. "Then it should be a worthwhile evaluation." His jaw ticked, but he said nothing. We both understood what wasn't being said. Inside the operations tent, the mood was the same as every forward post I've ever visited, half tension, half resignation. Everyone moved with the discipline of men expecting things to go wrong soon. Satellite maps covered the walls, red-marked overlays showing patrol paths, failed recoveries, known kill zones. Jennings led the morning brief. Grid 7 Foxtrot, 900 meters across. No confirmed enemy installations. No strongholds. Just patterns that suggest someone's shaping the terrain into a kill box. He pointed to the image, highlighting zones where patrols had been flanked, visibility lost, teams cut off. I sat in the back of the room, clipboard balanced on my knee, taking notes. Nothing dramatic, just cataloging. My handwriting was precise, practiced, line after line, like a technician tallying hardware. Navarro chimed in. "Enemies playing smart. Natural bottlenecks. No electronic signatures. No visible footprints. They're using elevation, thermals, and ambient noise to cover movement. We're getting outplayed." Someone asked about air support. Jennings shook his head. "No go. No positive ID. Can't call in a strike without confirmation. And we've still got 2 men unaccounted for in the burn. No one's greenlighting ordnance until we know their status." The room went silent for a beat. I lifted my eyes. "What's the dominant wind pattern in the basin?" They blinked at me. Jennings cleared his throat. South by southeast. Updrafts by day. Cooling off at night." "Why?" I didn't answer directly. Just made a mark in the margin of my notes. It was enough. Jennings looked at me differently after that. Not with trust. Not yet. But with caution. The kind that comes when someone starts to realize they might be dealing with a different breed of professional. Because I wasn't there to observe. Not really. Not just. By the time the sun cleared the edge of the eastern range, forward base Anvil was already baking. The tin roofs radiated heat like griddles. Dust shimmered in the distance, turning the ridge lines into something that looked unreal, like a mirage that never went away. Inside the armory, the squad assembled for final prep. It was Jennings' team, but the eyes drifting toward me were cautious, if not outright doubtful. I didn't blame them. I wasn't in uniform. Not really. Not in the way they were. I had traded the clipboard for a compact rucksack and field gear that didn't look shiny or new. Just used. Purpose-built. Navarro narrowed his eyes. You planning to come out with us, ma'am? I'll stay on the high ridge, I said evenly. Best view of the terrain. Best view's also the worst place to be if things go loud. Jennings added, arms crossed. We call it Overwatch, but up there, you're exposed. No cover. Just altitude and luck. Then I'll bring luck, I replied. My tone was calm, but final. He studied me a beat longer than necessary, then nodded. You carrying? I have what I need. No one asked for specifics. They didn't have to. The team did their checks. One final run through weapons, comms, med kits. Each man moved like it might be the last time. No one said it, but they were preparing for silence. The kind you don't come back from. In the corner, an extra row of gear had been laid out. Cleaned. Checked. Rechecked. It belonged to Echo Team. Or what was left of them. Two were still unaccounted for, Private First Class Joel Abrams and Sergeant Kenji Sato. Their last known location was a shallow ridge inside the burn. Their comms had gone dead 72 hours ago. No distress call. Just silence. And in the burn, silence was a bad sign. I remembered Abrams. Young, eager. Carried himself like a man trying to earn his place every minute. Sato, by contrast, had eyes like old glass, smooth, unreadable. He didn't talk unless it mattered. The kind of operator who survived things most people never imagined. Now both were shadows on a screen. When the convoy rolled out at 0700, it was 3 vehicles, one mine-resistant truck up front, one Humvee in the middle, and a scout bike pair trailing the column. Classic 3-prong push. I rode in the Humvee, window cracked, sand brushing my cheeks. I didn't speak. Instead, I watched. Movement in the brush. The way birds lifted without a predator. Shifts in wind. It all mattered. The burn loomed closer. A depression in the earth shaped like a shallow bowl, ringed by jagged stone. Looked peaceful from a distance. Like a place where nothing had ever happened. I'd seen that trick before. Jennings signaled for a halt. Ridge point. Set perimeter. The vehicles huddled into a defensive ring. Operators dismounted, moved with silent coordination. Routine. Muscle memory. Except for the way some of them kept glancing at the burn like it was watching back. You stay here, Jennings told me. We'll check in every 15 minutes. If comms go down. I'll know, I said. He gave me one last look, still skeptical, but a little less so. Then he disappeared over the edge with his team. 12 men. Each one stepping into a place where maps turned into guesses. I settled behind a rock outcrop with binoculars and my kit. I had clear lines of sight across the valley and parts of the ridge. The first radio check came in just under 20 minutes after they entered the basin. Burn entry, Echo 1. No contact. Moving to checkpoint Alpha. Copy, Echo 1. I replied. Hold schedule. Another 20 minutes passed. Echo 1 to Overwatch. Checkpoint Alpha secure. No activity. Moving to Bravo. Then nothing. A crackle. Static. Then Jennings' voice. Clipped, strained. Echo 2. Overwatch. Something's wrong. Movement in. And then nothing at all. No return signal. No confirmation. Just the hiss of open air and the distant, hollow sound of wind brushing against stone. I switched channels. Emergency frequencies. Nothing. The net was dead. I raised my binoculars and scanned the burn. At first, nothing. Then I saw them. Dark shapes pressed to the rock. Jennings' team. Not moving. Not advancing. Not retreating. Weapons lowered. They were surrendering. I stared through the glass. Something twisted in my chest. Anger, maybe. Or something deeper. That basin had just devoured another squad. Unless someone changed the rules. I opened the rucksack slowly, hands steady. There was no panic, no dramatic flair. Just the rhythm of long-ingrained habit. My gear wasn't standard issue. None of it was. The rifle I pulled out was compact, matte black, and threaded with a suppressor. I'd built it myself. One of a kind. Lightweight, no thermal bleed, optimized for rapid displacement shooting. Beside it, a sidearm I hadn't drawn in years. Not because I forgot how, but because it only came out when things were past saving. Today qualified. I loaded both weapons without speaking a word into the comms. There was no point. The radio net was dead, and those men were on the edge of death or capture. In the burn, surrender didn't mean survival. It meant vanishing. I moved, not toward the basin, but away from it. Up the opposite ridge, toward high ground that looked impossible to climb. Steep. Exposed. A place no one sane would go when ambushed forces were below. But I'd walked terrain like this before. Places not on any map. In wars no one admitted we fought. The eastern ridge of the burn wasn't just rock and shadow. It was a battlefield sculpted with precision. Loose stone for sound masking. Sharp drops for broken visibility. A few hardened nests could control the entire basin. And from above, I'd seen them. They weren't obvious. That was the genius of it. The enemy had dug in smart, low profile, zero heat signature. But they had to look somewhere. And they weren't looking here. I climbed with deliberate economy. Steps placed where no slide would betray my presence. I used the slope's own blind spots, crawled between ridgelines, and vanished in shadows. The wind helped. South by southeast, just like I thought. I adjusted elevation against it, my breathing syncing with the terrain. I found the first nest tucked behind a cluster of natural stone pillars. A sniper, prone, silent, rifle trained on the men below. From 15 meters, I put a round clean through his chest before his finger twitched. He didn't scream, just folded quietly into the rocks. I moved before his rifle stopped rolling. Next nest, cave mouth, partially hidden by overgrowth. 2 men inside. I heard them speaking softly, laughing even. I pulled a frag from my vest, cooked it to 3, rolled it inside, and dropped flat. The explosion cracked the mountainside. Echoes stretched across the burn. Shouts followed. Confusion. They knew someone was up here now. Good. The third position was higher. A sniper roost cut into a chimney-like structure with 360-degree sight lines. That one would be a problem. To reach it, I had to cross open ground. 40 meters, no cover, full exposure. They'd see me if I wasn't fast. So I didn't try to be invisible. I was fast. I ran low, body tight to the incline, feet kicking gravel as I sprinted the final stretch. The shooter turned just in time to catch the glint of my optics. Then I dropped him with 2 rounds center mass before he got his weapon aligned. I kept running. Below, the firefight shifted. It didn't erupt. It unraveled. The enemy had relied on control, on angles, dominance, visibility. I had taken those away. Now they were blind, panicked. And my shots weren't just kills, they were noise. They made the burn echo with uncertainty. Jennings' team, moments ago on the edge of surrender, lifted their heads. I saw it in their movement. Hesitation, then hope. They didn't know who was firing, but the enemy did, and that was enough. I settled into a crevice just west of the last sniper nest, checked my angles, and exhaled. Deep, controlled. I watched the burn through my optics, saw the shift in movement as my interference rippled through the fight below. Seals don't break easily, but even they can be ground down when the math is all wrong. When the enemy sees everything and you see nothing. But now that equation was cracked wide open. Jennings rose first. I saw it through the lens. His rifle came back up, cautious, then ready. One of his men, Morales, I think, signaled a wide flank. Another took up position near a collapsed outcrop, scanning for hostile targets. And just like that, the tide shifted. Over the open channel, Navarro's voice cracked through the static. Overwatch, this is Echo 1. Status report? I keyed the mic, voice steady. Echo 1, opposition is being cleared. A beat of silence. Who's clearing it? I am. Another pause, heavier this time. Ma'am, what are your actual qualifications? Before I could answer, another burst of gunfire rattled the ridge, followed by the thump of an explosion. It came from a final fallback point I hadn't mapped until now, an emergency holdout, likely meant as a last-stand position for their snipers. I hadn't seen it earlier. That was my miss. I was moving before Jennings finished his next question. I reached the fallback position just as 2 of them tried to relocate. one dragging what looked like comms gear. They never made it. I dropped them both. Clean shots. Not proud ones. Just necessary. Silence returned, finally. For the first time since sunrise, the burn was quiet. Overwatch channel lit again. Echo 1 confirm. Grid 7. Foxtrot. 3 is clear? I checked my angle. Confirmed no movement. Scanned twice. Confirmed. Grid clear. You are green to proceed. Jennings didn't answer immediately. Then, copy that. I knew what was next. They'd moved to the last known location of the two missing operators. Abrams and Sato. Their tracker pings had gone cold days ago, but the final coordinates were still on the board. That was where I'd heard the last fragments of movement before I lost radio contact. I slipped down from the sniper's nest, keeping low, angling toward a slope I could use for partial descent. I'd need to meet them at the bottom, not to lead, but to be there when it mattered. Because whatever they found down there, it would be bad. Or worse. The climb down was worse than the way up. Not in terms of effort, just in what waited at the bottom. The burn didn't feel hostile anymore. It felt wrong, like it had been expecting to keep its trophies. Echo Squad moved with caution now. Not fear. Purpose. They fanned out, 3 tight elements sweeping through the southern quadrant, checking every cave mouth and shadowed overhang near the final GPS pings. I kept my distance but remained within comms range, watching from an elevation just above their search pattern. Echo 1 to Overwatch. Jennings called. Reaching Grid 7. Foxtrot. 3 now. Movement inside shallow cave. 2 bodies. Stand by. Silence fell. Then Navarro came on the net. Scratch that. 2 breathing bodies. They're alive. Barely. I exhaled quietly and moved in closer. When I rounded the slope into view, the team was pulling both men out from a narrow rock crevice, more a crawl space than a cave. Abrams was semi-conscious, lips cracked, skin pale under desert grime. Sato was worse. Bullet through the shoulder, legs shredded by fragmentation, but breathing. Both looked like they'd clung to life by sheer will. They were bait, Jennings muttered, crouched beside them. They left them here to draw us in. Let us try a rescue so they could pick us off from the walls. I nodded. Flawless tactic. Control the high ground. Offer hope. Set the trap. Bleed the rescuers until no one tries anymore. Navarro looked up. Would have worked too, if not for you. I didn't answer. There was nothing to say. The medics worked fast. Fluids. Temporary dressings. Pain suppressants. The extraction bird was already en route. Jennings had called it once the ridge went quiet. As we waited, the sun drifted higher, pushing light into every crack of the burn. It looked almost peaceful now, like the kind of place a family might camp, if they didn't know better. I stood back from the main group and surveyed the ridge again. I wasn't looking for threats. I was just making sure they were all gone. The enemy had abandoned the basin as fast as they'd controlled it. Once they lost their sight lines, their advantage disappeared. They weren't interested in a fair fight. That's what made them dangerous. And predictable. The medevac bird came in fast, a tilted descent against wind currents I'd mapped earlier. Dust blasted across the valley as the wheels touched down. Abrams and Sato went up first, medics shouting vitals into headsets. Echo Squad followed. Then Jennings turned toward me. You coming with? I hesitated, just for a second, then nodded. The ride out was quiet, just rotor noise and the rhythmic ping of medical monitors. I sat in the back of the bird, across from Jennings and Navarro, who were still processing what had happened. Across from us, Abrams was stabilized and unconscious. Sato was breathing shallow but steady. Jennings stared at me for a long moment before speaking. You cleared 5 defensive positions alone. 3 of them before we even realized the enemy was in motion. That's not logistics, ma'am. That's surgical warfare. I met his gaze. That ridge was a death trap. You don't dismantle those with spreadsheets. Navarro leaned forward, voice lower. You're not just a field analyst, are you? I was, I said carefully. For operations that didn't exist. Until they were over. Jennings ran a hand over his face. That a real unit you're part of? Or one of those groups that only answers to people with names like Director? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. They took the silence as confirmation. We rode the rest of the way without words. Base Anvil looked exactly the same when we returned, sun-baked, quiet, forgettable. But the shift was immediate. The moment boots hit the tarmac, base staff rushed the wounded off the bird, shouting orders, wheeling stretchers, relaying vital signs. The usual medevac chaos. I stepped off last. Didn't say anything to the crew. Just slipped into the background. That was always easier than answering questions I wasn't allowed to. By the time the bird lifted again, I was halfway back to the quarters I hadn't spent a single night in. Jennings caught up to me outside the command post. "You disappearing again?" he asked. "Yes. Officially. Unofficially. The official version will say your team advanced into the burn, retrieved 2 missing operators, and repelled enemy forces due to unexpected tactical advantage." He nodded slowly, like a man who knew how reports got cleaned up. That unexpected advantage wouldn't happen to have a name, would it? I paused at the door. "Doesn't need one," I said. "Not officially." I started to turn, but he stopped me with one last question. "Why do you do it? This kind of work. Ghost work." I looked him in the eye. Because sometimes, when people give up, all it takes is one person who doesn't. I didn't say goodbye. There's no ceremony when you're not supposed to be there in the first place. I left my quarters the same way I arrived, quietly, without a trace. The clipboard was gone. The gear packed. The rest folded into a duffel that looked like any other. One patch left behind, pinned to the wall beside the Burns mission board, gray stitching, black background, and a single name beneath the jagged outline of a valley. It wasn't mine. It never is. Before sunrise, my transport lifted off. No fanfare. No call sign. Just a redirect order and a new set of coordinates. By the time Jennings and Navarro returned from briefing their CO, my quarters were empty. Stripped. Sanitized. No logs. No gear checked out. Not even a trace on the base manifest. Just a paperless footprint. And that was the point. I wasn't here to leave a legacy. I was here to fix something. Still, they left that patch on the wall. Just a symbol. Something for the next team to ask about. Back in the operations center, the recovery was listed as successful, with a note that tactical advantage was achieved through unexpected battlefield shift. The after-action report was tagged for restricted channels only. It required 2 officer-level sign-offs, just to skim. Most wouldn't even know it existed. That's how these things go. What I did, would never be part of any training manual, never spoken of in open briefings. But it would echo, quietly, in the habits of every operator who rotated through Anvil. Every team after this one would approach the burn differently, more carefully, with a little more belief that the impossible wasn't a guarantee. Jennings would never say what happened out loud. Neither would Navarro. But they'd remember it every time they looked at that patch. Not because it honored me, because it reminded them that somewhere out there, someone was still watching. Someone they'd never see, but who might just show up when it mattered most. You don't stay in this line of work for long unless you learn how to disappear. Not just physically, digitally, emotionally, historically. That was the agreement from the start. My first handler told me, "You'll do things that change the course of lives. Just never expect anyone to know it was you." I understood then. I understood better now. From the outside, it looked like logistics. That was the cover. I'd trained in it, lived it. I could break down resupply chains or decode armored inventory rotas blindfolded. I filed forms and read terrain like a book, but only because terrain lied less than people. What I really did was identify pressure points. Situations designed to break. Missions left to fail. Teams sent where command already assumed they wouldn't return. And then, quietly, I intervened. Not every time. Not everywhere. But when the signs lined up, patterns I recognized from before, from darker years, I was sent. Sometimes with clearance. Sometimes just with a nod from someone whose title I was never allowed to write down. I was the safeguard for the Forsaken. And that day in the burn wasn't an anomaly. It was just the first time I'd had to go loud in years. Most of the time, the best work left no echoes. But occasionally, you had to break the silence. You had to pick up the rifle and cross into the place nobody else wanted to go. Not because you'd win, but because if you didn't, no one would. Back in the States, there are places I visit when the noise gets too loud. Not crowded ones, quiet corners. Overlooked trails. Old lighthouses. Forgotten diners that serve breakfast all day and don't ask questions when you sit alone for hours. In one of those diners, there's a waitress named Mel. She doesn't know who I am, but she knows I always order black coffee and write in the margins of old paperbacks. She once asked if I was a teacher. I said yes. It's not a lie. Not entirely. Because that's what I do in the silence between operations. I study patterns. I write things down. I prep for the next place I'll be needed. People think the most dangerous weapon on the battlefield is a drone, or a marksman, or a satellite strike. They're wrong. It's someone who's invisible. Someone with just enough knowledge to be underestimated, until it's too late. That's why I move the way I do. That's why I leave no trail, no recognition, no memorials. But every once in a while, someone remembers. Last month, I got a package with no return address. Inside was a patch. Black, gray thread, outline of a jagged valley. Beneath it, stitched in tiny, precise letters, "You changed the fight." There was nothing else. No note. No sender. But I didn't need one. I pinned it to the inside of my pack. Near the top, where I can feel it when I reach for gear. A reminder, not of what I did, but of what I still have left to do. The world keeps turning. New deployments. New names on the rosters. New threats that look too familiar to be entirely new. The faces change, but the patterns don't. There will always be missions written off as impossible. Teams sent in with half the intel and twice the risk. There will always be valleys like the burn, traps dressed up as objectives. And when that happens, someone has to go. Someone who's not in the system. Someone who doesn't exist. That's me. Not for the glory. Not for the medals. God knows I've refused more ribbons than most generals wear. I do it because I've been there. I've been the one they gave up on. The name they scratched from rosters before the last flare even hit the sky. And I swore, if I ever made it out, I'd make damn sure nobody else got left in a place like that again. I don't need thanks. I don't need recognition. I just need to know that maybe, once in a while, the enemy watches their flank a little harder, hesitates a moment longer, because somewhere out there, they remember a day when the battle turned without warning, when someone they never saw came out of nowhere and made sure good people didn't die for nothing. And if I can keep doing that, even just once more, then I've done what I was made to do. Because the quiet war never ends. And neither do I.